The gunshot that killed Rebecca Jensen's father echoed through Parowan, Utah Territory, on a scorching August morning in 1878, and for 3 weeks afterward, she had not spoken a single word to anyone except her younger brother. Rebecca stood at the counter of her father's general store, now hers by default, arranging jars of preserves with trembling hands. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floorboards. At 22 years old, she had inherited not just a business but a burden she never wanted. Her father, Thomas Jensen, had been shot down in the street by cattle baron Marcus Dane's men over a water rights dispute. Everyone in town knew the truth, but no one dared speak it aloud. Marcus Dane owned half the county, employed a quarter of the men in Parowan, and had the sheriff firmly in his pocket. The bell above the door jangled, and Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She did not look up, keeping her eyes fixed on the preserves even as heavy boots crossed the floor toward her. "Miss Jensen," came a deep voice, roughened by years of trail dust and wind. She finally glanced up to see Ryder Yates standing on the other side of the counter. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that fell slightly too long around his collar. His eyes were the color of whiskey, and they held a gentleness that seemed at odds with the worn Colt revolver strapped to his hip. Rebecca had seen him around town for the past 2 months, working odd jobs at the livery stable and occasionally riding out with small ranchers who needed an extra hand during roundup. "I need some supplies," he said, his voice softer now. "Flour, coffee, beans, whatever you can spare." Rebecca nodded and moved mechanically through the store, gathering the items he requested. Her hands shook slightly as she wrapped the goods in brown paper and tied them with string. When she set them on the counter, she could not bring herself to speak the total cost. Instead, she wrote the numbers on a scrap of paper and slid it across to him. Ryder looked at the paper, then at her. "You do not talk much, do you?" She shook her head, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. He did not press her. He simply counted out the coins, added an extra $1, and tipped his hat. "Thank you, Miss Jensen. I appreciate your kindness." After he left, Rebecca found herself breathing easier, though she could not say why. There was something about Ryder Yates that felt safe, like shelter in a storm. The following week, notices appeared throughout Parowan announcing a town meeting. Marcus Dane was proposing to divert the creek that fed the smaller farms and ranches east of town, channeling it exclusively to his sprawling cattle operation. The meeting would take place on Thursday evening in the schoolhouse, and all interested parties were encouraged to attend and voice their concerns. Rebecca read the notice with growing dread. The creek fed the well behind her store. Without that water source, she would have to pay exorbitant prices to have water hauled in from Dane's own operation. It was a scheme designed to force her to sell the store to him at a fraction of its worth. She had already refused 3 offers, each one accompanied by thinly veiled threats. Her brother Samuel, just 16 and still grieving their father, urged her to go to the meeting. "You have to speak up, Rebecca. You have to tell them what this will do to us." But the thought of standing before the entire town, of speaking in front of Marcus Dane and his men, filled her with a terror so profound that she could barely breathe. Since their father's death, words seemed to stick in her throat like thorns. She had managed only whispers to Samuel, and even those came with great effort. Thursday arrived too quickly. Rebecca, dressed in her plainest brown dress, pulled her auburn hair into a severe bun and walked with Samuel to the schoolhouse as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The building was already crowded when they arrived. Ranchers and farmers filled the benches, their faces weathered and worried. Their wives sat beside them, whispering behind gloved hands. Marcus Dane stood at the front of the room with his foreman, a cruel-faced man named Pike, and two other hired guns. Dane was in his 50s, barrel-chested and balding, with cold blue eyes that missed nothing. He wore an expensive suit that looked out of place in the rustic schoolhouse, and he smiled like a man who had already won. The meeting was called to order by Mayor Hoskins, a nervous little man who kept mopping his brow with a handkerchief. He stammered through the proposal, reading from papers that Dane had clearly prepared for him. The plan was presented as a matter of progress and efficiency. Dane argued that consolidating water resources would strengthen Parowan's economy and ensure prosperity for all. "Now then," Mayor Hoskins said, his voice quavering, "if anyone has objections or concerns, they may speak now." Silence filled the room. Rebecca watched as farmers shifted uncomfortably on their benches, exchanging glances but saying nothing. She knew they were afraid. They had seen what happened to her father. They had families to protect, livelihoods to preserve. The mayor waited, looking almost relieved that no one was protesting. "Very well, if there are no objections, we will move to a vote. I object." The voice came from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see Ryder Yates standing up from where he had been leaning against the wall. He stepped forward, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Rebecca's heart hammered in her chest as he walked past her row. Marcus Dane's smile faded. "And who might you be?" "Ryder Yates. I work for several of the ranchers here." "Well, Mr. Yates, this is a matter for property owners, not hired hands." "It is a matter for anyone who values fairness," Ryder said evenly. "Your proposal would devastate the eastern farms and ranches. You know that as well as I do." Dane's face reddened. "The water rights are complicated, and the water rights belong to everyone who settled here legally," Ryder interrupted. "That creek has fed these lands for decades. You cannot just take it because you have more cattle and deeper pockets." A murmur ran through the crowd. Rebecca saw hope flicker in the eyes of the farmers, though they still remained silent. Pike, Dane's foreman, stepped forward with his hand on his gun. "Maybe you should mind your own business, Drifter." Ryder did not flinch. "Maybe you should remember that there are laws even out here." Mayor Hoskins looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. "Gentlemen, please, let us keep this civil." Marcus Dane raised a hand, and Pike stepped back, though his eyes never left Ryder. "Mr. Yates, I appreciate your passion, but you clearly do not understand the economic realities of this territory. Small operations are simply not sustainable. Consolidation is the future." "Consolidation is just another word for theft when you are the only one benefiting," Ryder said. The room erupted in whispers. Rebecca wanted to stand, wanted to add her voice to Ryder's, but her throat felt closed, her tongue useless. She gripped the edge of the bench until her knuckles turned white. Dane's eyes swept across the room and landed on her. "Miss Jensen, you run your father's store. Surely you have an opinion on this matter." Every head turned toward Rebecca. She felt the weight of their gazes like physical pressure. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Her face burned with shame and frustration. She had so much to say, but the words were trapped inside her, prisoners of her fear. The silence stretched unbearably. Some people began to look away, embarrassed for her. Marcus Dane's smile returned, triumphant and cruel. Then Ryder Yates was there, standing beside her bench. "Miss Jensen has every right to be concerned," he said clearly. "The creek feeds the well at her store. Without it, she would be at your mercy for water, Mr. Dane. And we all know how merciful you have been to those who oppose you." Dane's face darkened. "Are you accusing me of something?" "I am stating facts," Ryder said. "Thomas Jensen objected to your land acquisitions. 2 days later, he was shot dead in the street. The killer was never found." The room went deathly quiet. Mayor Hoskins made a strangled sound. Pike's hand moved to his gun, but Dane stopped him with a glance. "That is a serious allegation," Dane said, his voice low and dangerous. "Do you have any proof?" "I have eyes and common sense," Ryder replied, "the same as everyone in this room." Rebecca's heart was racing so fast she thought it might burst. No one had spoken so directly about her father's murder. Everyone had whispered and speculated, but no one had confronted Dane outright. She looked up at Ryder, standing tall and fearless beside her, and felt something shift inside her chest. "I will speak for Miss Jensen," Ryder continued, looking directly at Dane. "She opposes your proposal. She knows it will ruin her business and force her to sell to you at a loss. She knows you have been trying to acquire her property since her father's death. And she knows that standing up to you might cost her everything, just like it cost her father his life." Dane took a step forward. "You are a fool, Yates. You just made an enemy of the wrong man." "I have had worse enemies," Ryder said calmly. The tension in the room was suffocating. Finally, one of the farmers stood up. "Yates is right. This proposal is just Dane trying to steal our water." Then another man stood, and another. Soon half the room was on its feet, voices rising in agreement. The silence had been broken, and once it started, the protest could not be stopped. Mayor Hoskins banged his gavel ineffectively. "Order! Order, please!" Marcus Dane looked around the room with barely contained rage. His eyes found Rebecca again, and the promise of retribution in them was clear. Then he turned and strode out of the schoolhouse, his men following behind him. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Farmers surrounded Ryder, shaking his hand and thanking him. Rebecca sat frozen on her bench, overwhelmed by what had just happened. Samuel squeezed her arm. "That cowboy just saved us, Rebecca." When the crowd finally thinned, Rebecca found Ryder standing outside the schoolhouse, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She approached him slowly, her heart pounding. She wanted to thank him, to tell him how much his courage meant to her, but the words still would not come. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Miss Jensen," he said, tipping his hat. "I hope I did not overstep. I know you might have wanted to speak for yourself." She shook her head quickly, her eyes stinging with tears. She wanted to speak more than anything, but her voice was still locked away. Ryder's expression softened. "You do not have to say anything. I understand." But she needed to try. For him, she needed to try. She opened her mouth, forced air through her throat, and managed a whisper so quiet he had to lean in to hear it. "Thank you." Those two words cost her everything, leaving her trembling and exhausted. But the smile that spread across Ryder's face made it worth the effort. "You are welcome," he said gently. "And Miss Jensen, you are braver than you know." Over the following days, Parowan settled into an uneasy peace. The mayor, emboldened by the town's reaction, postponed any decision on Dane's water proposal indefinitely. But everyone knew that Marcus Dane was not a man to accept defeat gracefully. Rebecca found herself watching for Ryder, hoping to see him come into the store. When 3 days passed without a glimpse of him, she felt an unfamiliar sense of loss. On the 4th day, he finally appeared, leading his horse to the hitching post outside. The bell jingled as he entered. "Good morning, Miss Jensen." She managed a small smile and a nod. He approached the counter and removed his hat, turning it in his hands. "I was wondering if you might need some help around here. I noticed some of the boards on your porch are loose, and that back fence looks like it could use mending." Rebecca's eyes widened. She gestured to the paper and pencil on the counter, and he slid them to her. She wrote quickly, "I cannot pay much. I am not asking for much," he said. "Just a fair wage for a day's work." She wrote again. "Why are you being kind to me?" Ryder read the question and was quiet for a moment. "Maybe because kindness seems to be in short supply around here." And maybe because I think you have had a raw deal and somebody ought to help make it right." There was something in his eyes, a sincerity that made Rebecca's chest tighten. She nodded and wrote a figure on the paper. He accepted with a handshake that was warm and firm. He worked through the afternoon, and Rebecca found excuses to walk past the window to watch him. He moved with an easy competence, his muscles flexing as he hammered and sawed. Samuel helped him, and she could hear them talking and occasionally laughing. The sound warmed something in her that had been cold since her father's death. When the work was finished, Ryder came inside, wiping sweat from his brow. "All done. Your porch should hold steady now, and that fence will not fall over in the next windstorm." Rebecca counted out his wages and added extra. He tried to refuse, but she pushed it back toward him with a determined look. He finally accepted with a small grin. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Jensen." She grabbed the paper and wrote, "Rebecca. Call me Rebecca." "Rebecca," he repeated, and the way he said her name sent warmth through her entire body. "And you can call me Ryder." From that day forward, he found reasons to come by the store almost daily. Sometimes he needed supplies. Sometimes he offered to help with heavy lifting or repairs. Sometimes he just stopped in to check on her and Samuel. Rebecca began to live for those visits, for the sound of his voice and the safety she felt in his presence. She tried speaking to him more often, pushing past her fear in small increments. Single words at first, then short phrases. He never rushed her, never made her feel inadequate. He simply listened as if whatever she managed to say was the most important thing in the world. 3 weeks after the town meeting, Samuel burst into the store one evening, breathless and frightened. "Rebecca, there are men watching our house." Fear shot through her. Ryder was there, having just finished replacing a broken window. "How many?" he asked sharply. "Two that I saw. They were standing across the street, just staring at our place." Ryder's jaw tightened. "Pack a bag, both of you, just essentials." "You are staying somewhere else tonight." Rebecca shook her head and grabbed his arm. "Safe," she whispered. "Nowhere safe." "The Hendersons owe me a favor," Ryder said. "They will take you in, no questions asked." He escorted them to the Henderson farm outside of town as darkness fell. The Hendersons were an older couple who welcomed Rebecca and Samuel with warm concern. Mrs. Henderson fussed over them, preparing supper and making up beds in their spare room. Ryder stood by the door, preparing to leave. Rebecca caught his hand. "You," she whispered. "I will keep watch," he said. "Make sure Dane's men do not try anything." "Dangerous," she managed, her voice cracking with emotion. He covered her hand with his other one, his touch gentle but firm. "I will be careful, but I will not let them hurt you, Rebecca. That is a promise." She wanted to tell him not to go, wanted to beg him to stay safe, wanted to say so many things that crowded her throat. Instead, she squeezed his hand tightly, trying to communicate everything she could not say. He understood. She saw it in his eyes. He squeezed back, then reluctantly pulled away. "I will see you tomorrow." Rebecca barely slept that night. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to Samuel's steady breathing and worrying about Ryder. When morning finally came, she and Samuel returned to town with Mr. Henderson. The store was untouched, but their house behind it had been vandalized. Windows were broken, furniture overturned, and a warning was painted on the wall: "Sell or else." Rebecca stood in the wreckage of her home, trembling with anger and fear. Samuel looked like he wanted to cry. Then Ryder appeared in the doorway and relief flooded through her. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "They must have come after I rode past during my rounds." She shook her head and reached for the paper she always carried now. "This is not your fault." "The sheriff needs to see this," Samuel said. Ryder's expression was grim. "The sheriff works for Dane. This will not be investigated." "Then what do we do?" Samuel asked, his voice breaking. Rebecca looked at the destruction around her and felt something harden in her chest. She had been silent for too long, had let fear control her for weeks. Her father would be ashamed of her cowardice. She picked up a pencil with a shaking hand and wrote, "I will not sell. I will not run." Ryder read her words and nodded slowly. "Then we make this place secure. Bars on the windows, better locks, maybe even board up the back entrance. And I will stay here nights, keep watch." "You would do that?" Samuel asked. "I would," Ryder said, looking at Rebecca. "If that is all right with you." She wanted to speak, needed him to hear her voice. She took a breath, pushed past the fear, and forced the words out. "Yes, please, stay." It was barely more than a whisper, but it was hers. Ryder's face lit up with something that looked like pride and something warmer. "Then I will stay." Over the following weeks, Ryder became a constant presence. He helped them clean and repair the damage, reinforced the house and store, and slept in the store at night with his rifle across his lap. During the days, he worked for various ranchers but always returned by evening. Rebecca found herself growing more comfortable with him. Her words came easier when they were alone. She began to tell him about her father, about the life they had built in Parowan, about her dreams for the store. He told her about his own past, about growing up in Texas, about losing his family to fever when he was 19, about the years he had spent drifting from town to town, never quite finding a place to call home. "Why did you stay here?" she asked one evening as they sat on the repaired porch, watching the sun set over the mountains. The words came haltingly, but they came. "At first, I stayed because the work was steady," he said. "But then I saw you at that meeting, and I saw how afraid you were. And I saw how no one else was willing to stand up for what was right." He paused, turning his hat in his hands. "I guess I stayed because I thought maybe I could help, maybe I could make a difference for once." "You did," Rebecca said softly. "You made all the difference." He looked at her, and the expression in his eyes made her breath catch. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something." Her heart pounded. "What?" "I did not just stay for the work or even for the fight against Dane." He set his hat aside and turned to face her fully. "I stayed because of you. Because you are the bravest person I have ever met, even if you do not see it yourself. Because your smile makes my whole day brighter. Because I think about you every moment we are apart." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Ryder, you do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I know I am just a drifter with no prospects. I know you could do better. I just needed you to know how I felt." She reached out and took his hand, holding it between both of hers. The words that had been trapped for so long suddenly came pouring out, still quiet but clear. "You are not just anything. You are the man who stood up when no one else would. You are the man who protected me and my brother. You are the man who made me feel safe for the first time in months." She took a shaky breath. "You are the man I have fallen in love with." Ryder's eyes widened. "Rebecca, I love you," she said, stronger now. "I love your kindness and your courage. I love how gentle you are with me. I love how you listen like my words matter." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you, Ryder Yates." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I love you too, Rebecca Jensen. I love you more than I thought I could ever love anyone." When he kissed her, it was soft and sweet and perfect. Rebecca felt the last of her fear melt away, replaced by a warmth that spread through her entire being. She had found something she thought was lost forever: hope. They were so absorbed in each other that they did not hear the horses approaching until it was almost too late. Ryder pulled back suddenly, his hand moving to his gun. 3 riders were coming down the street, and Rebecca recognized Pike in the lead. "Get inside," Ryder said urgently. "No," Rebecca said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "I will not hide anymore." The riders stopped in front of the store. Pike leaned forward in his saddle, his expression ugly. "Mr. Dane wants to make another offer on your property, Miss Jensen. A generous offer." "No," Rebecca said. Her voice shook, but it carried. Pike's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Dane does not like hearing no." "And we do not care what Mr. Dane likes," Ryder said, stepping in front of Rebecca. "The lady has made her position clear." "You are making a mistake, Drifter," Pike said. "Mr. Dane gets what he wants one way or another." "Is that a threat?" Ryder asked. Pike grinned. "Just a fact of life." "Here is another fact," came a new voice. Sheriff Garrett rode up, his deputy beside him. "Threatening citizens is against the law, Pike." Rebecca was shocked. The sheriff had been firmly in Dane's pocket since the beginning. What had changed? Pike looked equally surprised. "We were just delivering a message, Sheriff." "I heard the message," Garrett said. "And I heard the threat. Now I suggest you and your boys ride on out of here before I find a reason to lock you up." Pike's face reddened, but he wheeled his horse around. The three men rode off at a gallop, kicking up dust. Sheriff Garrett dismounted and approached the porch. He was in his 40s, weathered and tired-looking. "Miss Jensen, Mr. Yates, I owe you both an apology." "What is this about?" Ryder asked cautiously. The sheriff removed his hat. "I have been a coward. I let Marcus Dane run this town because I was afraid of losing my job, maybe my life. I looked the other way when your father was killed, Miss Jensen, and I will carry that shame to my grave." He met Rebecca's eyes. "But last night, Dane came to me and told me to arrest you on false charges. He said it was time to stop playing games and just take what he wanted. And I realized I could not do it anymore. I could not be part of his corruption anymore." Rebecca's throat tightened with emotion. "You believe he killed my father?" "I know he did," Garrett said heavily. "Pike did it on his orders. I cannot prove it in court, but I know it, and I am done pretending I do not." "What will you do?" Ryder asked. "I have sent a telegram to the territorial marshal. I have documented everything I know about Dane's activities. The land grabs, the intimidation, the murder." He looked at Rebecca. "I cannot bring your father back, but maybe I can get you justice." Tears streamed down Rebecca's face. "Thank you," she whispered. The sheriff nodded. "It is the least I can do. In the meantime, I will be keeping a close eye on Dane and his men. If they come near you or your property, they will answer to me." True to his word, Sheriff Garrett became a regular presence in town. His deputy was posted near the store during business hours, and the sheriff himself made rounds every night. Dane's harassment stopped, but the tension remained. Everyone knew the real battle was still to come. The territorial marshal arrived 2 weeks later. He was a hard-eyed man named Coleman, who conducted his investigation with quiet efficiency. He interviewed witnesses, examined records, and gathered testimony. Rebecca gave her statement, her voice growing stronger as she detailed everything that had happened since her father's death. On a cold October morning, Marshal Coleman arrested Marcus Dane and 3 of his men, including Pike, on charges of murder, conspiracy, and illegal land acquisition. The arrests caused a sensation throughout the territory. Dane's operation began to collapse immediately as creditors called in loans and former partners distanced themselves. The trial took place in the territorial capital that winter. Rebecca and Ryder traveled there together, along with Sheriff Garrett and several other witnesses. It was Rebecca's first time leaving Parowan, and despite the grim purpose, she found herself excited to see new places with Ryder by her side. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Rebecca had to testify about her father's death and the subsequent intimidation. When the prosecutor asked her to identify the man who had threatened her repeatedly, she pointed directly at Marcus Dane and said in a clear, strong voice, "That man tried to destroy everything my father built. That man had my father killed." That man terrorized me and my brother." Dane's lawyer tried to break her testimony, but Rebecca held firm. All the words that had been trapped inside her for so long now flowed freely when it mattered most. Ryder sat in the gallery, his eyes full of pride and love. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges. Marcus Dane was sentenced to hang for murder. Pike and the actual shooter received the same sentence. Dane's other associates received prison terms. When the verdict was read, Rebecca felt the weight she had been carrying finally lift. She turned to find Ryder, and he was already moving toward her, pulling her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest and cried, releasing months of grief and fear and pain. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "It is finally over." They returned to Parowan as winter settled over the territory. The town welcomed them back with new respect. Rebecca was no longer the frightened young woman who could not speak. She had found her voice and used it to bring down a tyrant. The story spread throughout the territory, and the store's business actually improved as people came from surrounding areas to meet the brave woman who had testified against Marcus Dane. Christmas approached, and Rebecca worked hard to make the store festive. She hung pine boughs and ribbons, and Samuel cut down a small tree that they decorated with paper ornaments and strings of popcorn. Ryder spent Christmas Eve with them, and after Samuel went to bed, he and Rebecca sat by the fire in the repaired house. "I have been thinking," Ryder said, turning his hat in his hands the way he did when he was nervous. "About what?" Rebecca asked, though her heart had already started racing. "About staying, permanently." He looked at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "I have drifted for years, never putting down roots, but I do not want to drift anymore. I want to build a life here in Parowan, with you if you will have me." Rebecca's breath caught. "What are you saying?" He slid off his chair and onto one knee. From his pocket, he pulled a simple gold ring. "I am saying I love you, Rebecca Jensen. I am saying I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I am saying I want to help you run that store and raise a family and grow old together." His voice was rough with emotion. "Will you marry me?" Rebecca launched herself at him, nearly knocking him over. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her deeply. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "You have made me the happiest man alive." "You saved my life," she whispered. "You gave me back my voice and my courage. You gave me everything." They were married in early spring of 1879, in the same schoolhouse where Ryder had first stood up for her. The whole town attended, and Sheriff Garrett gave the bride away. Samuel stood as Ryder's best man, grinning from ear to ear. Rebecca wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved, and carried wildflowers that Ryder had picked himself that morning. When the preacher asked if she took Ryder to be her husband, Rebecca said, "I do," in a voice that rang clear through the room. Ryder's eyes shone with tears as he said his own vows. When they kissed as husband and wife, the schoolhouse erupted in applause. Ryder moved into the house behind the store, and they fell into an easy partnership. He helped run the business, and his natural charm brought in even more customers. He was good with numbers and inventory, complementing Rebecca's organizational skills. Together, they made the store more profitable than it had been even in her father's time. Samuel thrived under Ryder's guidance. The boy who had been lost and grieving found a new confidence. Ryder taught him to ride and rope, to handle a gun safely, and to stand up for what was right. When Samuel turned 18, he told Rebecca and Ryder that he wanted to become a lawman like Sheriff Garrett. They supported his decision, and he began training as Garrett's new deputy. Rebecca's voice grew stronger every day. She began attending church regularly, volunteering for community events, and even speaking at town meetings. The woman who had once been too terrified to utter a word became known throughout the territory as someone who spoke truth fearlessly. But her favorite moments were still the quiet ones with Ryder, when words were not always necessary, when a look or a touch said everything. In the fall of 1880, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. She told Ryder one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains that had become so familiar. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "A baby," she confirmed, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. He kissed her then, softly and reverently. "I did not think I could be happier than I already was. I was wrong." Their son was born the following spring on a warm May morning. They named him Thomas, after Rebecca's father. He had Ryder's dark hair and Rebecca's green eyes, and from the moment he entered the world, he had both of them wrapped around his tiny fingers. Ryder proved to be a devoted father. Rebecca often found him in the nursery late at night, just watching Thomas sleep with an expression of absolute contentment on his face. "I never had this," he told her once. "A real family, a real home. Sometimes I have to check that it is real, that I did not just dream you both up." "We are real," she assured him, kissing him gently. "And we are yours." The years passed peacefully. The store continued to prosper, and they eventually expanded it, adding a section for farm equipment and tools. Samuel became a full deputy and eventually was elected sheriff when Garrett retired. He married a schoolteacher named Mary, and they built a house on the edge of town. Rebecca and Ryder had 2 more children, a daughter they named Sarah in 1883 and another son, James, in 1886. Their home was filled with laughter and love, with the sound of running feet and childish giggles. Rebecca sometimes thought back to those dark months after her father's death, when she had been trapped in silence and fear, and marveled at how much her life had changed. One evening in 1890, Rebecca and Ryder celebrated their 11th wedding anniversary by taking a rare evening alone. Their children were staying with Samuel and Mary, and the house was unusually quiet. They sat on the porch as they had so many times before, watching the familiar sunset. "You ever regret it?" Rebecca asked. "Staying here instead of moving on?" Ryder turned to her with surprise. "Regret it?" "Rebecca, marrying you and building this life is the only thing I have ever done that I am completely certain was right. You and our children are everything to me." She leaned against his shoulder, content. "I was so afraid back then. Afraid to speak, afraid to stand up for myself, afraid of everything." "You were never as weak as you thought," Ryder said, wrapping his arm around her. "You just needed someone to stand beside you until you remembered your own strength." "You did more than stand beside me," she said. "You spoke for me when I could not speak for myself. You believed in me when I did not believe in myself. And look at you now," he said with pride. "The strongest woman I know. A successful businesswoman, a wonderful mother, the heart of this community. That was all you, Rebecca. I just helped you see it." She turned to kiss him, pouring 11 years of love and gratitude into it. When they pulled apart, she rested her hand on his cheek. "We built something good here." "We did," he agreed. "Something worth fighting for, something worth staying for." The years continued to roll by like the seasons. Thomas grew into a serious, studious boy who loved books almost as much as he loved helping in the store. Sarah was spirited and adventurous, always climbing trees and chasing after her older brother. James was the baby, sweet-natured and affectionate, who charmed everyone he met. In 1895, when Thomas was 14, he announced his intention to become a doctor. Rebecca and Ryder were thrilled, though it meant saving money to send him to medical school back east. They worked extra hours, scrimped where they could, and slowly built up the necessary funds. Sarah, at 12, declared she wanted to be a rancher. She spent every spare moment at neighboring ranches, learning about horses and cattle. Ryder taught her everything he knew, and she soaked it up like a sponge. She had her father's way with animals and her mother's determination. James, at 9, was still figuring out his path, but he showed a talent for drawing and painting. Rebecca encouraged his artistic pursuits, buying him paper and pencils whenever she could. The store continued to thrive. Rebecca and Ryder had become fixtures in Parowan, respected and beloved by the community. They employed several people now, giving jobs to those who needed them and creating opportunity in their corner of Utah Territory. One day in 1897, a young woman came into the store, her clothes dusty from travel and her eyes filled with fear. She approached the counter hesitantly. "Excuse me, I am looking for Rebecca Yates." "I am Rebecca Yates," Rebecca said warmly. "How can I help you?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "My name is Martha. I heard about you, about how you stood up to a powerful man who was trying to steal your land. About how a cowboy spoke for you when you could not speak for yourself." She took a shaky breath. "I am in a similar situation. The man who owns the ranch where I work is demanding things from me, threatening me. I do not know what to do or where to turn, but someone told me to find you." Rebecca felt a rush of memories. She saw herself at 22, terrified and voiceless. She reached across the counter and took Martha's hand. "You came to the right place. Tell me everything." Over the next several hours, Rebecca listened to Martha's story. She involved Sheriff Samuel, who was now an experienced and highly respected lawman. Together, they helped Martha file charges against her employer and found her a safe place to stay. The case went to trial, and Rebecca sat with Martha throughout the proceedings, offering support and encouragement. When Martha was too afraid to testify, Rebecca took the stand herself and told her own story. She described what it felt like to be powerless and afraid, and she looked directly at Martha as she spoke. "But I learned something important. Evil men count on our silence. They count on our fear. And when we find the courage to speak, when we refuse to be silenced, they lose their power." Martha found her courage. She testified, and the rancher was convicted. Afterwards, she hugged Rebecca tightly. "Thank you. You gave me my voice back." "No," Rebecca said gently. "I just reminded you that you had one." The incident reminded Rebecca of how far she had come and how many other women might be in similar situations. She began working with other women in town to create a network of support for those facing abuse or intimidation. They met regularly, shared resources, and advocated for legal protections. It became one of Rebecca's greatest passions, this work of helping women find their voices. Ryder supported her completely, often caring for their younger children during her meetings and advocacy work. He was proud of the woman she had become, though he always maintained she had been that woman all along. She just needed the chance to bloom. In 1899, Thomas left for medical school in Philadelphia. It was bittersweet, watching their oldest child board the train heading east. Rebecca cried against Ryder's chest as the train pulled away, and he held her tight. "He will come back," Ryder assured her, "and when he does, he will make a difference here, just like his mother." Sarah, at 16, was already working at one of the larger ranches, learning the business from the ground up. The owner, impressed by her dedication and skill, had promised to sell her a parcel of land when she turned 18 so she could start her own operation. She was already saving every penny. James, at 13, had decorated their home with beautiful sketches and paintings. A traveling art dealer who passed through Parowan saw his work and declared the boy had real talent. He offered to sponsor James's education at an art school in San Francisco when he was old enough. The new century arrived with celebration and hope. Parowan had grown and prospered, and Rebecca and Ryder had been part of that growth. The store was now one of the largest and most successful businesses in town, and their reputation for fairness and generosity had made them beloved figures in the community. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1899, the town threw them a party in the schoolhouse. Nearly everyone in Parowan attended, bringing food and gifts and stories about how Rebecca and Ryder had helped them over the years. Sheriff Samuel gave a speech about how Ryder had taught him what it meant to be a real man, and Mary talked about how Rebecca's courage had inspired all the women in town. When it was their turn to speak, Ryder pulled Rebecca to her feet beside him. 20 years ago, he said, I was a drifter with no real purpose or direction. Then I walked into a town meeting and saw a young woman who was too scared to speak, and something in me decided that I could not just walk away. I had to help if I could. He turned to Rebecca, his eyes shining. I thought I was helping you, but the truth is, you saved me. You gave me a reason to stay, a reason to build instead of drift, a reason to become the man I always wanted to be. Rebecca's throat was tight with emotion. She looked out at the crowd of friends and neighbors, at the community they had helped build, and then at her husband. I found my voice because of this man, she said clearly. But more than that, I found my courage, my strength, my purpose. Ryder did not just speak for me that night. He stood beside me and showed me that I did not have to face the world alone. She took his hand. We have built a beautiful life together, raised beautiful children, and helped create a community where justice and kindness matter. I could not ask for anything more. They kissed as the crowd applauded, and Rebecca felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt the first time he kissed her all those years ago. The early 1900s brought changes to Parowan and the nation. Utah achieved statehood in 1896, bringing new opportunities and challenges. The Wild West was slowly being tamed, replaced by more established institutions and infrastructure. The store adapted, adding new products and services as the needs of the community evolved. Thomas graduated from medical school in 1903 and returned to Parowan to set up a practice. He was 23 now, a serious and dedicated young man who had inherited his mother's compassion and his father's steady reliability. His return was a source of great joy for Rebecca and Ryder. Sarah fulfilled her dream in 1904, purchasing her parcel of land and starting her own small ranch. At 21, she was one of the youngest female ranch owners in the territory. Ryder helped her build her first barn, and Rebecca managed her accounts until Sarah got established. She hired a few hands and began building her herd, working dawn to dusk with tireless energy. James went to art school in San Francisco in 1905, his talent having attracted the attention of several prominent artists. Though Rebecca worried about him in the big city, he wrote regularly, his letters full of enthusiasm for his studies and the new techniques he was learning. As Rebecca and Ryder entered their 40s, they began to think about the future of the store. They had built it into a thriving enterprise, but they knew they would not be able to run it forever. They began training a young couple, Mark and Julia, who had recently moved to Parowan. The couple showed real aptitude for business, and more importantly, they shared Rebecca and Ryder's values of fairness and community service. One evening in 1907, as Rebecca and Ryder sat on their porch watching another sunset, Rebecca said, "We have had a good life, haven't we?" "The best," Ryder agreed. He was in his late 40s now, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that came from years of smiling. But he was still the same man who had stood up in that town meeting 29 years ago, still steady and kind and brave. "Do you remember that first day in the store?" Rebecca asked. "When you bought supplies and I could not even speak to tell you the price? I remember thinking you had the saddest eyes I had ever seen," Ryder said. "And I remember wanting to do something, anything, to make that sadness go away." "You did more than that," Rebecca said. "You changed everything." "We changed everything," he corrected. "Together." She leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. 3 decades had passed since that terrible day when her father was killed, since the fear had stolen her voice. But from that darkness had come light, a love story that had transformed both their lives, a family that brought them joy, a community they had helped build and strengthen. Their children were grown now, making their own marks on the world. Thomas was saving lives with his medical skills. Sarah was building a ranching empire, proving that women could succeed in what had traditionally been a man's world. James's art was being exhibited in galleries in San Francisco, bringing beauty into people's lives. In 1910, Samuel was elected mayor of Parowan. In his acceptance speech, he credited Rebecca and Ryder with shaping him into the man he had become. "My sister and her husband taught me that courage is not the absence of fear," he said. "It is doing what is right even when you are afraid. They taught me that one person standing up can inspire others to do the same. They taught me that love and justice are worth fighting for." As the years continued, Rebecca and Ryder gradually stepped back from running the store day to day, though they still owned it and consulted on major decisions. Mark and Julia proved to be excellent managers, running the business with the same integrity that Rebecca and Ryder had established. This gave Rebecca and Ryder more time to enjoy their grandchildren. Thomas married a nurse named Elizabeth in 1909, and they had their first child, a daughter named Rebecca, in 1910. Sarah married one of her ranch hands, a good man named Robert, in 1911, and they had twin boys in 1912. Even James found love in San Francisco, marrying a fellow artist named Catherine in 1913. Rebecca delighted in being a grandmother. She taught little Rebecca to read and bake. She let the twin boys, Michael and Matthew, help in the store when they visited. She wrote long letters to Catherine and James, encouraging his art and welcoming her into the family. Ryder was an equally devoted grandfather. He carved toys for the children, told them stories of the old Wild West days, and taught them to ride when they were old enough. He had infinite patience with their questions and endless energy for their games. In 1915, on a beautiful spring day, Rebecca and Ryder celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at their home for a party. The house was filled with laughter and love, with the sounds of children playing and adults catching up. As the party wound down and the sun began to set, Rebecca found herself on the porch once again with Ryder. It had become their special place, this porch where they had first confessed their love, where they had weathered storms and celebrated joys, where they had watched their children grow and dreamed their dreams. 36 years, Ryder said, shaking his head in wonder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I walked into that town meeting. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago." "It was a lifetime ago," Rebecca said. "We were different people then." "Were we?" Ryder asked. "Or were we always these people, just waiting for the right moment to become who we were meant to be?" Rebecca considered this. "Maybe a little of both. You were always brave and kind. I was always stronger than I knew, but we helped each other become the best versions of ourselves." "We did," Ryder agreed. He took her hand, the same hand he had held countless times over the decades. "Thank you, Rebecca." "For what?" "For saying yes when I asked you to marry me, for building this life with me, for giving me a home and a family and a purpose." His voice was thick with emotion. "For being the love of my life." Tears slipped down Rebecca's cheeks. "You gave me my voice back. You gave me the courage to speak. You stood beside me and showed me I was not alone. How could I not love you?" They kissed as the sun set. Two people who had found each other in the darkness and built a life together in the light. Behind them, through the open door, they could hear their family laughing and talking, the sound of the legacy they had created together. The world continued to change around them. The automobile became more common, electric lights replaced oil lamps, and the modern age arrived with its conveniences and complications. But through it all, Rebecca and Ryder remained constants in Parowan, beloved elders who embodied the best values of the community. Rebecca continued her work advocating for women, though it was easier now with more legal protections in place. She took pride in seeing young women speak up at town meetings without fear, knowing that she had helped create that change. She served on various civic committees and was instrumental in establishing a lending library in Parowan. Ryder worked with young men in the community, teaching them skills and values. He was particularly focused on helping those who were lost or struggling, remembering his own years of drifting. He believed that everyone deserved a chance to find their purpose, and he gave countless young men that chance through his mentorship and guidance. In 1920, women gained the right to vote nationally. Rebecca, now 64 years old, cast her first vote with tears of joy streaming down her face. She thought about the frightened young woman she had been, the one who could not even speak at a town meeting, and marveled at how far she and all women had come. Ryder stood beside her at the polling place, his own eyes damp with emotion. "Your father would be so proud," he whispered. "So would yours," she replied, squeezing his hand. The 1920s brought prosperity and change. Their grandchildren were growing up in a world very different from the one Rebecca and Ryder had known in their youth. Thomas's daughter Rebecca was studying to be a teacher. Sarah's twins were helping run their mother's ranch, which had grown into one of the largest operations in the region. James's children, born in San Francisco, were artistic and intellectual, thriving in the city's cultural atmosphere. In 1924, Rebecca and Ryder celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary. They were both in their late 60s now, slowed by age but still vital and engaged with life. The celebration was smaller than their 20th or 30th anniversaries, just family gathered for a quiet dinner. Samuel, now in his early 60s and retired from being mayor, gave a toast. "To my sister and the man who became my brother, you showed me what real love looks like. Not the easy romance of youth, but the deep, abiding love that grows stronger through years of partnership and devotion. You built something beautiful together, and all of us here are part of that beauty." Rebecca looked around the table at her children and grandchildren, at the family that had grown from that first spark of love in a difficult time. She thought about the journey she and Ryder had taken together, from fear and silence to strength and voice, from two wounded individuals to a united partnership that had weathered every storm. "I was so afraid once," she said, her voice still clear despite her age. "Afraid to speak, afraid to stand up for myself, afraid to love. But Ryder taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, it is choosing to act despite the fear." She reached for his hand. "And love is not the absence of hardship, it is choosing to stand together no matter what comes." Ryder raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You were always brave, Rebecca. You just needed someone to stand beside you until you remembered." "We stood beside each other," she corrected. "That is what made all the difference." The years after were peaceful ones. Rebecca and Ryder spent their days in quiet contentment, working in their garden, reading on the porch, visiting with grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. They had lived long, full lives filled with love and purpose and meaning. One morning, in late spring of 1929, Rebecca woke to find sunlight streaming through the bedroom window. She turned to see Ryder still sleeping beside her, his face peaceful in the morning light. She studied him, memorizing every line and feature even though she had seen this face every day for 50 years. When he woke and caught her looking, he smiled. "Good morning, my love." "Good morning," she replied, reaching out to cup his weathered cheek. "I was just thinking how lucky I am." "Funny," he said, covering her hand with his. "I was dreaming the same thing." They rose and went about their day, doing the simple things that had become their routine. Breakfast together, a walk through town to visit the store and check on things, lunch with some friends, an afternoon reading in the shade of their porch, dinner with Samuel and Mary, and finally, as the sun set, their quiet time together watching the sky change colors. "You ever regret anything?" Rebecca asked as they sat on their porch that evening, wrapped in blankets against the cool spring air. Ryder thought for a long moment. "No, not one thing. Every choice I made, every turn I took, it all led me to you. How could I regret that, even the hard times?" she pressed. "The danger, the fear, the struggles, especially those," he said. "They made us who we are. They showed us what we were made of. They proved that our love was strong enough to weather anything." He turned to look at her. "Given the choice to live my life over, I would not change a thing. I would still walk into that town meeting. I would still stand up and speak for you. I would still fall in love with the bravest woman I ever met." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Even after all these years, he could still move her to tears with his words. "I love you, Ryder Yates. I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you forever. And I love you, Rebecca Yates. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat together as the sun set, hands clasped, hearts full, surrounded by the life they had built together through courage and love and unwavering commitment. The wild west of their youth was long gone, replaced by a more settled world. But their love remained, as wild and strong as it had ever been, a testament to what could be built when two people stood together. Years continued to pass in gentle succession. In 1932, they celebrated their 53rd wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. Rebecca was 76 now, her auburn hair completely white, her movements slower but her spirit still strong. Ryder, at 78, walked with a cane but still had the same warm eyes and gentle smile. Thomas had become one of the most respected doctors in Utah, known for his skill and compassion. Sarah's ranch was now being run by her sons, under her watchful supervision, and it had become a model of successful ranching operations. James had gained recognition as an important regional artist, his paintings hanging in galleries and museums throughout the West. In the spring of 1934, Rebecca fell ill. It started as a simple cold but developed into pneumonia. Thomas did everything he could, but at 80 years old, her body was simply wearing out. She spent 2 weeks in bed, with Ryder rarely leaving her side. On a warm May morning, with sunlight streaming through the window and Ryder holding her hand, Rebecca opened her eyes and smiled at her husband. "It has been a beautiful life," she whispered. "The most beautiful," Ryder agreed, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you for sharing it with me." "No regrets?" she asked. "Not one," he said firmly. "Not one single regret." "Good," she said softly. "I will wait for you, on the other side I will be waiting." "I know," Ryder said, bringing her hand to his lips, "but do not wait too long, I will be right behind you." She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. "I love you, Ryder, always and forever." "I love you too, Rebecca, always and forever." Those were the last words she spoke. She closed her eyes with a smile on her face and slipped away peacefully, surrounded by love. Ryder held her for a long time after she was gone, remembering the scared young woman he had first seen at that town meeting 56 years ago, remembering the first time she had whispered "thank you," remembering their first kiss, their wedding day, the births of their children, 1,000 sunsets watched together, a lifetime of love shared. The funeral was the largest Parowan had ever seen. People came from all over Utah to pay their respects to the woman who had transformed from silence into a powerful voice for justice and compassion. Story after story was told about how Rebecca had helped someone, inspired someone, changed someone's life for the better. Ryder listened to it all with pride and sorrow mingled together. His children gathered around him, supporting him through his grief. But even in his sadness, he felt gratitude for the 53 years they had shared, for the life they had built together, for the love that had sustained them both. After the funeral, Ryder returned to the house that had been theirs for so many decades. It felt empty without Rebecca in it. He sat on their porch alone for the first time in 53 years, watching the sunset by himself. Samuel found him there, sitting quietly with tears on his weathered face. "Rebecca would not want you to grieve forever," Samuel said gently, sitting beside his brother-in-law. "I know," Ryder said. "But right now I need to miss her. I need to honor what we had by feeling this loss." "It was a remarkable love," Samuel said. "Everyone could see it. The way you looked at each other even after all these years. The way you supported each other, stood beside each other. You showed all of us what love should look like." Ryder nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Finally, he said, "She saved me, you know. I was lost before I met her, drifting from place to place with no real purpose. She gave me a reason to stay, to build, to become better than I was." "You saved her too," Samuel said. "You gave her back her voice. You showed her she was brave." "We saved each other," Ryder said. "That is what real love does." Ryder lived for 3 more years after Rebecca's death. He spent his days visiting with his children and grandchildren, working in the garden Rebecca had loved, and sitting on their porch watching sunsets. He was often seen talking to the empty chair beside him, telling Rebecca about his day as if she were still there. In the spring of 1937, Ryder's health began to fail. Thomas wanted to admit him to the hospital, but Ryder refused. "I want to be home," he said, "in the house I shared with your mother." His children honored his wishes. They took turns staying with him, making sure he was comfortable and never alone. On a warm evening in May, exactly 3 years after Rebecca's death, Ryder's children gathered around his bed. "Tell me about Mother," Thomas said, holding his father's hand. Ryder smiled, his eyes distant with memory. "She was the bravest person I ever knew, and the kindest, and the most beautiful inside and out." His voice was weak but clear. "The day I met her, I knew my drifting days were over. I knew I had found home." "You made her very happy," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Anyone could see that." "She made me happy," Ryder said. "Every single day, even the hard ones." He looked at each of his children. "Love each other, stand beside each other. That is what your mother and I tried to teach you. That is the legacy we wanted to leave." "We will," James promised. "We will honor you both by living that way." As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and pink, Ryder's breathing grew shallow. He seemed to be looking at something the others could not see, and a smile spread across his face. "Rebecca," he whispered, "you waited." Those were his last words. He took one more breath, released it slowly, and was gone, going to join the love of his life who had been waiting for him on the other side. They buried Ryder beside Rebecca in the Parowan cemetery, under a large oak tree with a view of the mountains they had loved. The headstone read, "Ryder and Rebecca Yates, a love that changed the world. Their children and grandchildren continued their legacy." Thomas's medical practice served Parowan for another 2 decades. Sarah's ranch remained in the family for generations. James's art preserved images of the Old West and the love story that had unfolded there. Samuel continued to tell the story of the town meeting, of the cowboy who stood up for a frightened young woman, inspiring new generations to find their courage and their voice. The store that Rebecca and her father had built remained a fixture in Parowan for many more decades, eventually being converted into a museum that told the history of the town. A permanent exhibit honored Rebecca and Ryder, displaying photographs, letters, and artifacts from their lives. Visitors came from all over to learn about the woman who had found her voice and the man who had loved her enough to speak for her, until she could speak for herself. Their love story became legend, passed down through the years as an example of what courage and devotion could accomplish. It was told to children as a bedtime story, to young couples as inspiration, to anyone who needed to remember that love could triumph over fear, that one person standing up could change everything, that silence could be transformed into strength. The world continued to change. The Wild West became history. Parowan grew from a frontier town into a modern community. But the story of Ryder and Rebecca Yates remained, a testament to a time when a cowboy and a frightened young woman found each other in the darkness and built a life together in the light, proving that love, courage, and standing together could overcome any obstacle. Their great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren grew up hearing the story. They learned about the town meeting where it all began, about the years of building a life together, about the advocacy and community service, about the deep and abiding love that had sustained 2 people through more than 5 decades of marriage. They learned that real love was not just romance and passion, though Rebecca and Ryder had shared plenty of that. Real love was partnership, support, standing together through every storm, choosing each other every single day. The house where Rebecca and Ryder had raised their family still stood, eventually also becoming part of the museum complex. Visitors could walk through the rooms where they had lived, sit on the porch where they had watched countless sunsets, and feel the echo of the love that had filled those spaces. On quiet evenings, when the museum was closed and the sun was setting over the western mountains, some claimed they could see 2 figures sitting on that porch. An elderly couple, holding hands, watching the sunset together just as they had done for so many years. Whether it was ghost or memory, or simply the power of a love story that refused to fade, no one could say for certain. But everyone agreed on one thing. The love between Ryder and Rebecca Yates was the kind that lasted forever. The kind that changed not just 2 lives but an entire community. The kind that proved that speaking up for someone in need could lead to the greatest adventure of all. A love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and lasting into eternity.